That was a very good start.
Do it again. So
Yeah.
do I just start again?
Yeah, how it affects modern leadership and what is to be a leader today.
Okay, so it's a question I've been asked many times in different forms over the last 10 or 15 years. And the essence of the question is, I think, is leadership changing? You know, is the leadership that we need today the same as the leadership that we had 10 years ago, 50 years ago, or 2,000 years ago in the Roman army? And my answer is kind of unhelpfully yes and no. So I think some aspects of leadership are unchanged from the days of the Roman army. I think some of the characteristics that we look for in leaders are exactly the same. Some of the expectations and the hopes of the people being led are the same. And there are some fundamental changes. And the biggest change that I've observed is the complexity of the world we now live in. It is generally accepted that things change, and they change in ways which are difficult to predict. And they change at rates that are varying. And it's hard to know when one particular driver of change is going to kick in and when another is not. And these drivers of change are multiple. So technology is a huge driver of change at the moment. And we talk a lot about disruption in industries, disruption in companies. And that requires disruptive leadership to a certain extent. So how do I lead in a disrupted world means that I have to be comfortable with complexity, ambiguity, uncertainty, unpredictability. So as a leader, I can't rely on long-term planning. I can't rely on having a clear strategy and then aligning things to follow. So the old metaphor for leadership of an organization was essentially built around a machine. So we talked about driving the machine, steering the machine, what levers do I pull, what buttons do I press, etc., etc. And that's not really true anymore, because we need to think of our organizations as living systems, which they are. And actions do not necessarily create direct cause and effect relationships. So we need to be ready to respond to. We might make a decision which leads to another decision which has an effect that we predicted, but it has another one that we didn't predict. And that's affected by what's going on in the outside world. It could be in our markets, in our industry, in our country. And so we've got to be much more confident, I believe, in living in the moment and being able to respond more intuitively and to involve more people in thinking through what do we need to do and how do we need to do it. And that requires us to push responsibility down the organization. I think we need to upskill people so that people at any level in an organization, they understand the kind of strategy, they understand what we're trying to achieve, and they have the jargon is simple rules, which could be company values that drive their behavior, and so people can take initiative. And if people at different levels in the organization can take initiative, then we have an organization that is more agile, more flexible, and more responsive. If we maintain the old model of organization where the leader, kind of sets out the plan, and then anybody who wants to deviate from the plan has to ask permission, and then ask permission again, and ask permission again, and everything goes up and down the hierarchy, it's very slow, and it's not particularly flexible or adaptable. So some of the requirements, if I want to lead an organization in that way, I have to trust people, I have to assume the best, I have to make it safe for people to have a go, and I have to make sure that people understand the context within which I am trusting them. So what's the frame? Do they understand the purpose? Do they understand the simple rules that should be guiding our behavior? So it's quite, from that point of view, it's quite a big change. What has not changed is that people still look for leaders they can respect, they look for leaders they can trust, they look for leaders who have a sense of direction, who can communicate a sense of purpose. So all those things are still the same. It's just the kind of how you do it, I think, that's changed quite significantly.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. And my second question is about in business schools, leadership is taught as a primary subject in most all business schools. But do you think leadership can be taught? Actually, one can be trained in leadership, or is it kind of a natural talent? And is there a sense for leaders to go to business school?
Yeah, that's a question that psychologists have been tussling with for the last 150 years, isn't it? Are leaders born or made? Now, clearly, I'm not going to say they're made, otherwise I'd be out of a job. So it's not in my interest to say, oh yeah, they're just born, that's the way it is. And I actually think it's a bit of both. I think everybody has leadership potential. I think some people have a lot of leadership potential, some people have less, but I sincerely believe everybody has leadership potential. And then the question is, how much energy, how much drive, how much commitment, how much determination is someone prepared to demonstrate in order to develop their leadership? Because if it doesn't come from inside, it's not going to come from anywhere. So organizations can provide support, and business schools can provide a learning environment in which people can reflect and challenge themselves and question their assumptions and explore new ways of leading. But the drive has to come from the individual. The motivation to be a leader, I believe, has to come from the individual. And I don't think we have a fixed quotient of leadership potential. So I've been working with leaders for over 25 years, and I've met people 20 years ago who I would not have thought would have got to the top of the organization, and they have. And equally, I've met people who you think, wow, they're going to go a long way, and they don't. So again, it's partly a question of drive and determination, and openness to learning, willingness to reflect. We say in English the word wisdom is very interesting, and wisdom is described as learning from my experience as I go through life. And some people go through life without learning very much, and I don't think they make very good leaders. I actually think learning and leadership are almost synonymous. And people who really reflect on their experience and learn from what works and what doesn't work, and are prepared to challenge themselves and be challenged by other people, then I think they grow as leaders, and they continue to grow, and they may find they've got more potential than even they realized. But I think the role of business schools in this is very much creating situations in which leaders can, in a relatively safe environment, explore their own leadership, explore new ideas, reflect on what's got them to where they are, reflect on the strengths they have to build on, look at the patterns of unhelpful behavior maybe that they have that they hadn't noticed, and look at ways of unhooking themselves from those patterns of unhelpful behavior, and getting clarity about, why am I a leader? What's the point of all this? Because it's not an easy job, and okay, the rewards are good, but I don't think most very senior leaders are actually motivated by rewards. I think once you get to a level, you think, well, that's it, I've got enough money to live on comfortably, so I don't actually need more. I think what takes people to the very higher levels of leadership is a real sense of purpose, a desire to make a difference. And that difference can be organizational success. It can be a desire to pass on their expertise, to leave a legacy in the organization of things they've learned and passed on to other people. And I think we in business schools can help people explore that question. And then, of course, we can just bring new ideas. I think we, business schools, should be at the forefront of exploring what's going on in leadership, of connecting leaders from different fields so that new ideas emerge. I don't think, as of a certain level, I don't think leaders need just more instruction. I think you get all the basic skills sorted out relatively early in your career. How do I do an appraisal? How do I build a team? How do I give feedback? All that sort of stuff. How do I set direction? And then after that, it's more a question of how do I personally do that? what difference do I bring as a leader to my team, to my organization, and how can I really build on that?
Thank you. Great. You have been teaching in Russia for quite a few occasions, but now you are teaching at Russia for Russian managers. Do you see any specifics in how they think, how they react, reflect in comparison to what you teach to in other countries? And also, do you think their leadership could be kind of have national flavor, like British leadership or Italian leadership, or maybe Russian?
That's a tricky question. I have worked on, as you say, several occasions in Russia, and I have always worked in multinational organizations in Russia. So what I have experienced is not maybe the typical leadership approach that you would find in a large state-owned Russian organization, for example. So from my own experience, I don't see major differences. I think possibly there is still an assumption in leadership in Russia about the strong individual, the need to be in control, confident, setting direction, and to a certain extent being very positive, but not necessarily asking a lot of questions, opening things up for discussion. I don't see, and again, it's based on my limited experience, but it has a very different feel to leading in Sweden, for example, where I see a much more consensus building approach to leadership, where people assume, all managers will assume, I have the right to question everything. It's part of my right. So you may be the chief executive and I may be 3 levels down from you, but I have the right to question you on anything, and you expect it. I'm not sure that's the case in Russia at the moment. I feel hierarchy is still important. And I think it's changing. I think as international businesses evolve, and maybe there's a generational shift as well. So I think it is evolving to perhaps a more supple approach. Yeah. And is there a national leadership style? There are certainly flavors, I think. There's a big danger when we talk about national leadership styles of stereotyping. So, you know, the British are like this and the French are like that and the Russians are like that. Because within every culture there are leaders who have very different styles and approaches. But I think some characteristics of national culture do permeate into the leadership culture. So, you know, it's probably fair to assume that an Italian leadership culture will be more animated, got more energy, more extroverted energy in it, maybe a bit more creative. But again, that may be a stereotype. And I'm working with a large Italian company at the moment, and that's my experience of them. But that's not to say they're not organized and they don't have processes and systems and all the rest of it. But if you just observed a British management board meeting and an Italian management board meeting, I think you would feel a difference, yeah. Yeah. And some of the differences are very subtle. So I've done a lot of work in France and the United States, and there are some interesting subtle differences. So when Americans work with French managers, they say, oh, you French guys, you never challenge your boss. And the French sort of say, well, you challenge your boss, but you're just playing games. It's not a serious challenge. And I think there's a degree of truth in that. So it's okay if you're an American to say, hey, I disagree. You know, I just cannot agree on that point. But somehow it's a point of disagreement that doesn't create a conflict with your boss. You're not fundamentally challenging his or her right to be the boss. Whereas in France, if you said, you know, I fundamentally disagree with that, it's like saying, well, frankly, you shouldn't be the boss because you don't know what you're talking about. So there are subtle cultural differences that get misinterpreted.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And last question, that we just discussed the new open program that we are going to launch at Stockholm School of Economics, Russia, dedicated to leadership. And, this program will be for those top management positions who want to develop them, and the program will be comprehensive. It's a modular program with things like individual assessment, individual coaching, simulations, exercises, and etc. And a lot of theories and skills trainings. So, what do you think might be the value of such a program for those managers who take part?
I think there are a number of different elements of things that I would consider to be of value. One of them, surprisingly, is just mixing with a group of peers from different organizations, different cultures, different sectors, because we tend to always have in-industry or in-company conversations. So it's a great opportunity to have your thinking challenged, your ideas challenged, your approach challenged, and to ask questions of people who are from outside the sector. And that's one of the real advantages, I think, of open programs. I mean, custom programs have all their advantages. One of the advantages of open programs is this diversity that's in the room that leads to a different kind of conversation. So I think that's one fundamental advantage. I think it creates space. So most senior managers are very busy, and with the best will in the world, they struggle to find what in English we'd call me time. It feels a bit selfish, a bit self-indulgent to stop and reflect on who am I as a leader, how am I doing, what could I improve. You've got things to do, you've got the task list to get through, and decisions to be made, big important decisions to be made. And so somehow just having the time carved out to focus on yourself as a leader is really powerful. A third source of value, I think, is the different ideas and inputs that we bring. So you're using different professors, different academics, different speakers, and I think all that is kind of great food for thought. And the diversity of opinion broadens and deepens the thinking of the leaders who are on the program. And even if it isn't all relevant, it's still kind of triggering ideas and making them think differently, and even if they reject it, well, it doesn't matter. They've given it some thought and they may come back to it later. So I think just bringing intellectual content is of real value. And then finally, and this is perhaps for me the most important, is that you can create an environment which is relatively safe for senior leaders to open up and to actually talk really honestly about how they're feeling, how they're experiencing their leadership, what excites them, what frustrates them, what motivates them, what really irritates them. And you get down to a level of really quite meaningful conversation. So, and again, that sometimes can't happen in their own companies because it's just not wise to open up too much to your peers or your direct reports. But in an environment like an open program with other senior leaders, provided you've built the trust, which we would, then it's an opportunity for individuals to open up and then to receive some challenge and some support that pushes their thinking beyond just new ideas and new content. It gets them to a level of, what should I really be thinking about? It gets to the gut, if you like, rather than the head. So those are the four things I can think of anyway, so straight off like that.
Thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome.
That's all? Yes, that's all. I agree with you that